Hey everyone, welcome to 8X Pixel Expo 8 monthly webinar global webcast October series. So this is where everybody gets together to talk about a cause that we do care about dearly, which is diving and also the ocean. So for the last session of the October series, we have, of course, three fantastic speakers that's going to be talking about the challenges that they face with recycled marine plastic. So this session is titled The Epic Journey of Recycled Marine Plastic. Reason being is because we have a speaker and we actually would like to have him as the Ocean Hero of the Month. And he is none other than Rob Thompson. And Rob is a conservationist and also a social entrepreneur and also a managing director of Odyssey Innovation Limited. Hi, Rob. How about a hello to everybody else? And together with us on this panel is, of course, Matilda De Silva, founder of Ocean Purpose Project from Singapore, and also Sweetania Puspa Lestari, Executive Director of Divers Clean Action from Indonesia, which will be joining us later in a dialogue exchange. Yeah. So, but before we proceed with the presentation, how about a hello from Matilda and Sweetania?
Hello.
Hey, TGIF, everybody.
Yes, I know it's TGIF, but we shall talk a little bit more about plastic today. TGIP, thank God.
TGI, that's right.
Anyway, let me just introduce a little bit more of who is Rob Thompson. So Rob spent his childhood playing in the ocean, and at the age of 3, he had his first glimpse under the surface of the ocean, and instantly he got hooked by the world of underwater. So you know, his plastic odyssey started around the year of 2014, where he put together a group of divers to clean up a cove in Cornwall. And together with pieces of plastics were recovered, not together, but thousands of pieces of plastic were recovered and continued by setting up a charity to recover underwater ocean plastic. So the challenges that they faced were like accessing coves, recycling recovered plastic, fundings, and also preventing plastic getting into the sea. So Rob believed that part of the plastic problem is our lack of resourcefulness, and also the thought that the plastic recovery was ending up only in landfill, and that itself is a troubling fact. So Odyssey Innovation was established to pioneer the circular economy by converting plastic from beach cleanups and to end-of-life nets from fishing communities into products. So their first products would be not something that I want to share, but I think I'll let Rob actually share with us a little bit more about all his products that he managed to innovate into. So here, without any further ado, please let me hand over the session to Rob. Rob, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we've been working now, well, since setting up the volunteer group in 2014 to try and find different solutions to the marine plastic challenge. And one of them for me, which we're very keen on, is prevention. So trying to find new ways to stop marine plastic getting in the ocean in the first place. It was obviously one of the challenges you meet as a diver is that you can keep recovering material, but it's costly and we can't access everything. You know, we have our sort of diving range limits. We can dive within, a lot of it's outside of those depths. We can have a really good positive impact locally on a certain reef or wreck and have a brilliant benefit to that immediate environment. But really, we need to stop plastic getting in the ocean in the first place, and we need to look at what we're doing when we recover the plastic. You know, it's arguably, if you're moving it out of the ocean and just putting it in landfill, you're just moving waste from one place to the other. We need to be able to actually innovate it back into something and get it back into the economy somehow. So we're looking at sort of different economic models as well. And I came across the theory of the circular economy, that actually we could start working with businesses and create businesses that are actually beneficial to the environment as opposed to always taking, which is quite common with traditional business models. You're using resources and creating demand for resources instead of utilizing what you already have. And that's very important to us, as well as sort of changing concepts around waste, taking something which is a waste problem and turning it into a resource. We can then start kind of capturing people's imagination around treating waste that way, in the way they do other things like scrap metal, for example. There's waste infrastructure in place for recycling that very simply, so it's not so much of a pollution issue. And that was one of the things we found, that there was basically a massive lack of infrastructure in place for recycling maritime plastic. So I'm just going to start a PowerPoint to show you some slides of the various things we've been involved in. So go to okay. Okay, so these are the three things we ended up focusing on. So the sort of overarching recycling scheme is marine regeneration, and then through that we work with several different charities, some of the larger ones like Surfers Against Sewage, etc. Some of the smaller dive charities, sailing organisations that are bringing in waste. What we did find was actually quite a lot of the waste we're finding was related to maritime industries, not just fishing, but shipping as well. And so we started engaging with fishing communities to look at ways we could make their practices more sustainable. And in doing that, we set up the net regeneration scheme to offer end-of-life recycling facilities for fishing gear to help get waste away from the harbours, remove any cost barriers associated. So it's all done completely for free for the fishing community. And we're actually now finding the fishing community helping with the cleanup operations as well, because now they've got somewhere they can bring the stuff in to be recycled for free when they're trawling and they're pulling up other people's lost plastic, which they do quite a lot. They've now got a means of bringing it in and getting it recycled as well. And the final one is our Paddle for Plastic campaign, which I'll go into in depth a little bit more later, but it's basically how we've innovated products which can be used to help recover more waste from the oceans. So if this actually decides to play, it's a short video that shows the actual recycling scheme in action. I'm Rob Thompson, founder of Odyssey Innovation. We've spent the last 5 years working on circular economy solutions for tackling marine plastic. Some of the most valuable work we do is work within the fishing communities. It was quite surprising when we started working on them a few years ago that there wasn't any recycling infrastructure in place for them to recycle their nets and other plastic that's generated throughout that industry. So we started setting up free net recycling schemes throughout the southwest to be able to start capturing that valuable material and getting it back into the economy.
Involved with Rob from Odyssey for the last 12 months. Assisting Rob, we assisted with funding, linked him with Morrison's to support Rob in his port collections. We're in Brixham today for another collection. We're working with Matt Holland from Exeter Recycling Centre. He's going to be picking up some end-of-life fishing gear, particularly the nets and old fish boxes as well. That will go for recycling.
We're really proud to work with Odyssey Innovation and support the net regeneration scheme, recycling fishing nets from across the peninsula. As you can see, this is the first of the skips that have been created by Odyssey, and that we hope to see many more. Able to offer these services where we can recycle all these hard plastics in the hope that we can incentivise the fishing fleets and the harbours and the ports and the authorities into recycling rigid plastic.
You can see it's an historic harbour, been fishing here for many centuries, but we now have a modern fishing fleet, forward looking in the sustainability and the recycling of all sorts of materials.
Fishermen have been very responsive to it. It gives them a good avenue for getting rid of their old end-of-life fishing gear.
A huge amount of plastics going into the oceans every year, something like 640,000 tonnes. The circular economy is about designing out waste, regenerating natural systems, and keeping products in use as long as possible. And this is something that, if we work together, we scale up to a point where we can really make a big impact. We, as Ghostbusters, go out on the beach collecting large-scale industrial ghost fishing nets that have been washed ashore. And Odyssey Innovation's net regeneration scheme has been invaluable for us because they actually take the nets away, get them recycled, and get them remanufactured into kayaks. And without that scheme in place, we wouldn't have the opportunity to get rid of this. This is plastic that would be in the ocean or in the environment forever.
We can be very proud in Cornwall of the role that we're playing in leading the charge in so many ways to cut plastic waste.
Now, I'd like to encourage other harbours and fishermen who aren't presently using the scheme to get on board and recycle your waste netting.
The scheme has been really successful in the southwest. It's had an amazing uptake from the fishing industry and from conservation groups. We've proven it can work. We've proven the value of it. And now we're looking at expansion. We're looking at partners in other regions to come on board and help support us. So if you're interested, please get in contact with us and help us expand and replicate this scheme. It's really valuable and it's needed elsewhere. Okay. I'm going to try to stop playing it. There we go. That's it. Yeah, so that's the sort of where the most of our material comes through from recycling schemes. It's actually preventative solutions. We're looking at stopping ocean waste getting in there in the first place and helping with other organisations that are recovering waste to get it into recycling schemes too. This is a sort of example of the different things that we can recycle. So it's quite a broad array there, from your most commonly found items, your household items, from post-consumer waste, bottles, all those kind of things, through to the sort of larger rigid plastics, broken floating pontoons and plastic oil drums and all different types of pots and traps. We found this is only a solution that's really can work for us on scale, to create viable recycling routes, which is why I've gone from quite a small idea of just doing something small scale myself to having to sort of expand quite a lot to get this waste into recycling routes. For me personally, I think there should have been 20 or 30 years, but there hasn't been because the traditional business model, recycling business model, doesn't stack up. The waste doesn't have enough material to pay for itself. That's been the real challenge here, is we're trying to recycle a low value waste stream from remote locations. We chose a very difficult one to start in, but it was my home, Cornwall. Lots of small fishing villages. So you've got distance to travel between them and you're transporting a really low value waste, and trying to create viable schemes there is challenging. It's taken 5 years to get to the point where we are with the recycling route, and we're only just hitting the point where we can start trying to make it break even. We can sort of add value to things as well, which is why we're now looking at sort of partnering with other organizations as well. Basically everything I do is 100% reliant on collaboration, which again is quite different than your traditional sort of business model, where it can be quite protective at times. A true circular economy model only really works through collaboration. So that's quite a logistically challenging thing to do as well. You're trying to juggle lots of different working relationships and partnerships, and at the same time we rely quite heavily on the goodwill and the support of individuals, charities, the fishing community, etc., which is the sort of really enjoyable bit of it. It's really positive working in that way, but again, it's quite a logistically challenging thing to put all that together, and that's how we've developed this scheme really, and how it differs from the traditional recycling model. This is just a quick sort of overview of the different harbours we're working in. Now we've actually expanded a lot more than this. We're currently now rolling out a scheme to other regions in the UK, which our skips are being rolled out next week along the coast of Wales, which is massively expanding our reach and the volumes that are coming through. We updated to this earlier in the video. So the first product that we created was sit on top kayaks. We did that in partnership with the kayak manufacturer, because when we started Odyssey Innovation, it was started with no funds basically. So we didn't have the resources for going out and buying expensive bits of equipment. And we partnered with an existing manufacturer and basically processed material to this state where it could be turned into kayaks. And now we're at a point where we actually have our own brand of kayaks, and we're manufacturing under our own brand, which would be back up and live again towards the end of the year. The idea of kayaks was, well, it came originally from using kayaks to do ocean cleanups. You know, we were using them in an estuary to help clean that up. And I'd been knocking around the idea of the circular economy for a little while, and decided that actually, if I'm going to create something, kayaks would be the perfect thing, because they could be used for actually cleaning up all the inaccessible stretches of coastline, for which in my home in Cornwall is the vast majority of it. And we were finding that the beaches, because of all the really good positive work from the communities, were being kept regularly cleaned, but the coves just around the corner from them with no access were really heavily polluted. So light watercraft like this, perfect for doing it. So that's why we first created the kayaks, and then we've recently moved on from that as well to try to create a product for the surfing industry. Again, trying to tap into a new demographic. We like building positive stories and relationships with the various demographics we're working with, and surfers spend a long time in the ocean. They've got a really positive attitude in that way, that they're absorbing all the good vibes from being in the sea, but quite often they're in non-recyclable wetsuits and on fiberglass non-recyclable surfboards. So we're trying to create a surf product, and this is just a product anyone can use for body surfing. So you just go in with just this tiny board that you keep on your hand, and just try and catch waves with your body, basically. So the boards themselves, they're made from trawl nets and ropes, and a few other different sources as well we're experimenting with at the moment. They've literally just gone live the last couple of weeks. And the sort of hand straps are all made from upcycled neoprene from old wetsuits. So we're actually trying to find a way of upcycling them, because then they can't be recycled. That's the end of the presentation, so I'll stop sharing. So along that journey that we've been taking, there's obviously been lots of trial and error, and quite a lot of error, to be quite honest, in sort of developing these recycling routes. And we're very keen on trying to outreach to others and help other innovators to kind of help them become more sustainable as well with their practices. So I'm not going to talk anymore about what we're doing, because this is very relevant to the other people that are in this conversation. So it would probably be best that we sort of switch over to a group chat, because they'll probably bring up questions which I'd be answering anyway. So that's it for me for a second.
Thanks so much, Rob. All right, so maybe what we can do is that we can start off with perhaps Sweetania. You can tell us a little bit more about Diverse Clean Action, and what are your plans with regards to like, you know, all the cleanups that you have done, and what is the actions towards those products that you have actually done. Over to you, Sweetania.
Thank you, Nora. So, hi everyone. My name is Tania. You can call me just Tania instead of Sweetania. It's too long, I guess, but it's okay. So, I'm the founder and executive director of Diverse Clean Action. We are a community and a foundation based in Indonesia, where we are act as a platform for youth to conserve the ocean and also coastal area. And we do have 4 main programs, such as we do research through citizen science cleanups and also waste mappings. And then the second of all, we do campaign and workshops. The third of all is we are collaborating with private sectors towards CSR and EPR programs. And the last one is we collaborate with several stakeholders, especially local governments, to do a community development programs in a coastal area, especially in the rural and also remote area, where they don't have the facilities of waste collections in place effectively. And it's really, really interesting to understand more about Rob's works out there, because one of the difficulties that we found as well on ground is how are the fishing gears waste that is discarded in the ocean is really something that we find a lot as well during our cleanup mappings. And we've tried several several ways of solutions, but we also face the difficulties on how to make sure that these fishing gears can be collected effectively without the necessities of investing on a storage area. Because for us, in our case, the fishing gears from the local fishermen, whether it's the conventional, the small scale of fishermen, and also the big scale of fishermen, they are not single-use usage. So it needs a long of time for us to fulfill the quota of the recycling industries. So it's really it's really interesting to find out more about how Rob's tackling that issues as well, Nora. But other than that, we also do recycles the recyclable materials that we found, and it turns into fashion items and also another plastic bottles from recycled plastics. Yeah, that's about it, Nora.
Thank you so much, Sweetania. So, Rob, what do you think? Like, based on just Sweetania sharing with her challenges with the fishing nets. I mean, like, of course, because of geolocation and different social, what do you call this? Because in Indonesia, it's more of a coastal communities and there's a lot of fisheries involved. And how about your side of the world? Is it something similar, or is your issues a little bit more of a larger scale?
Yes, no, to be honest, everyone I've talked to globally has this very similar issue when it comes to dealing with low value waste as a whole, whether it's fishing industry waste or just post-consumer plastic they're finding on beaches or in the countryside. It is trying to create those recycling routes is the biggest challenge. And before you can innovate, you need to have those recycling routes in place. We do work with a couple of large-scale European recyclers that specialise just in recycling fishing gear because it's particularly problematic. But we've trialled recycling fishing gear with many UK recyclers unsuccessfully, even the ones which are very confident to begin with that they can process it. So in the UK, we tend to process all the other waste that we find, all the rigid plastic and bottles and everything else that you can imagine. But yeah, you do end up being tied to sort of specialist recyclers for other elements, which then the biggest challenge becomes moving material around. It's the biggest overhead in creating these recycling routes is actually the cost of transportation quite often, and it will often outweigh the value of the material. So that's when the only really way around it is that you're only left with two options really. You're going down the grants and funding route, that you're finding partners that see the value in what you're doing and they're supporting you financially in that way to substitute that sort of shortfall, or you're looking at innovation yourself and you're kind of taking the losses in the early stages in the hope that in the long run you're ending up creating a material route where you have either a valuable raw material you can sell back to other industries or something you can innovate into product yourself. And that sounds like something which you're already quite progressed on if you're sort of working with clothing and that kind of stuff. That's really positive to hear, to be honest. What's the sort of, what materials are you struggling with the most to actually get into recycling routes out of all the different things that you're finding?
Yeah, so in terms of the fishing gears, like I said earlier, the quota is the main problem. So to make sure that we can get the quota of, for example, 1 containers, it took us for like maybe 6 months for us to really collect them from just the area of, for example, 20,000 people living there, which most of them are fishermen. So the collection is still the issue. Therefore, what's our programs earlier, since we have already working only for 5 years. So we are making sure that the waste collections can be in place effectively. So in the future steps, it is much more easier for us to really recycle that fishing gears. But other than that, actually, the non-recyclable materials or the ineffective recyclable things, of course, like single-use plastics, and then also rubbers, and then glasses, because we found a lot of shattered kind of materials rather than uncontaminated one. So yeah, I think the other steps that perhaps needs to be done is like what you said earlier about how to make sure that the waste route or the needs of, for example, the cleaning stations for the contaminated waste is still something that needs to be implemented to make it more sustainably and also more economically viable. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear. I'm not sure with you where you are currently, but with us, one of the things we did notice is it made quite a big difference to who we were reaching out to when we tried to expand, even in the same region, working with the same harbours. If you were just dealing with, in the UK, you have the harbour master that looks after the whole port. If we were just dealing with them, they were very happy to take our recycling bins and start recycling the waste with us. But they weren't passing on all the information necessary to the fishing community. So in some places we've been operating for a couple of years and some of the fishermen didn't even know we existed. So it's also, I mean, that was an error on our part. It showed that's what we needed to do actually was a lot more outreach with the fishermen themselves, actually in the fishing community, and really sort of have boots on the ground where you're reaching out to all potential stakeholders, which is challenging because then you're going from potentially only having to engage one person, the harbour master, to then having to engage the other 30 fishermen they've got with them as well to make sure they're aware that the scheme's there and how it works and everything else. But that is, if it's something you're not already doing, that is one way that you could potentially increase the volumes of material you've got coming in, because it's very rare you're going to be recycling 100% of what's available in the harbour, because you'll get some people that know about the scheme and want to participate and some people that just carry on with their old practices of doing things the same way. So the additional outreach might help if that's something which you're currently not focused on, but it might be something you're already doing. So
no, it's something that really refreshing and give us another new perspective. Thank you for that, Rob. Over to you again, Nora. Maybe Matilda wants to ask.
Yeah, Matilda, you have anything you want to add on regards to the challenges that Ocean Purpose Project? Because us being in Singapore, ghost nets is not really an issue, but of course, single-use plastic is, and you do have a couple of solutions that you're looking into. Perhaps you can share with us a little more about that.
Thank you so much, Nora, and thank you as well to Sweetie, Sweets.
It's okay. Call me everything.
Okay, yes, all right. And Rob, for the sharing. I'll just mention right gear and all the paddle gear and everything. So you got a customer right here. So I'm Matilda De Silva. I'm the CEO or Chief Purpose Officer of Ocean Purpose Project. We are a proudly Singapore Pasir Ris-based social enterprise. We're very new on the scene. We've only incorporated last year in March. What a time to incorporate a social enterprise right at the beginning of a global pandemic. So when you talk about challenges, Nora, it's just been one after the other. But the main reason why I started Ocean Purpose Project as well is because I myself have been affected by water pollution. That's through exposure to untreated sewage while I was paddling and representing my country. And that's the reason why I have 3 autoimmune conditions today. And that's also the reason why I wanted to start something. I think with OPP, we're more of like a bunch of crazy ideas or a movement than we are a company, so to speak. I'm going to be asking you a question about that as well. The things that we work on are things such as ocean plastic being turned into low sulfur fuel, or other products like carbon nanotubes or pure hydrogen. So we do that through chemical recycling, and really just comes from the question of, if plastic comes from oil, why can't we turn it back into oil again? It's that and simple, but it's also that complicated. One of the difficulties that we often face from fellow NGOs, is, how can you be working with the petrochem industry to figure out a solution to ocean plastic and convert that into low sulfur fuel or hydrogen? they are part of the problem, or they are the cause of the problem in the first place. And actually, it's a question for maybe Rob and Sweets, like, how do you kind of reconcile that? Not so much about the, public perception, but, the fact that you might have like partner NGOs or other associations, or even volunteers who are like, oh, how could you, work hand in glove with the fishing industry? They are part of the problem with the ghost nets, or, like how do you guys also, maybe you could share some tips on how to reconcile that? We're trying to solution engineer with the big bad polluters, but, sometimes it helps just to get a different point of view or a different perspective on that.
Okay. Yeah, well, to be honest with you, part of the reason I started working in the circular economy was because I wanted to prove that there's a different way of doing things. Because like yourself, you get frustrated at seeing industry waste washing up on your shores. And it was the same common polluters you're finding over and over again. And it came almost from a source of frustration, and thinking industry is a bad guy. It wasn't until I heard about the circular economy and I started to think that ideally industry could be benefiting the planet, but business models need to change. And I work quite a lot with new innovators coming along now, and I'm starting to see that attitude change slowly. But I think business models as a whole need to change to tackle this problem, that there has been a passing the buck in the past. They create a recyclable product and they think that's their due diligence done. The fact it isn't getting recycled, it doesn't bother them. And that's wrong. If you're creating a recyclable product, you should also be responsible for getting it recycled. So looking at different business models, not just the circular economy, but also things like extended producer responsibility, where your producer is responsible for the full life cycle of that product, I think is also going to be a real key driving force in this. But for us personally, what we wanted to do really was try and prove there was another way, and try and showcase that you could run a company and it not be a dirty word business, which it is generally to conservationists like myself, that really by changing your business model from the very outset, you could have companies that benefit the environment. And to me, one of the frustrations, I've been on quite a lot of these kind of business startup courses, and still what's being taught is a focus all around your product, your markets, how you get it to market, how you produce it. And then right at the end of the entire process, just when you're applying for a grant normally, it's what's your environmental policy? And that's the last thing anyone thinks about. And to me, that's completely wrong. If we're going to create sustainable business models for the future and actually have a sustainable planet, what we need to be doing when we're looking at new business models is go, I want to create a product. Is there a demand for it? Is there a need for it? Is it not needed in the first place? Am I creating unnecessary demand? Do we need this product? How am I going to go about making it in the most sustainable way? What's my market? Can I sell that product? And how does me creating that product benefit the communities and the planet? And if you don't have that kind of golden circle of things been down, you shouldn't carry on. That's my personal belief. Obviously, it's different when you're working with big industry, because it's already well established. And this is part of the challenge as well, that once they kind of have certain systems in place, they're very difficult to change. But on a positive note, what I am seeing is there is a big drive to change. There is a big uptake in people wanting to do the right thing now. And it's also driven by legislation and quotas as well for sort of CO2 reduction. There's a general lack of knowledge out there, I think, on how to do it. So having other business models, even if it's very small scale ones like mine, they can kind of show that there is different ways of doing it. You just go think a little bit more outside the box and you can start trying to redevelop them. I think that's a positive solution, but you're right, you are going to have to work with the bad guys in a way, the ones that you've been seeing as the polluters. And the same goes for the fishing industry. I see the fishing industry as being massively under-resourced. I think they should have always had the ability to dispose their waste sustainably. They haven't done. So before we go accusing them too much, let's put those facilities in place. Let's make it very easy and sustainable for the fishing industry to do the right thing. And then if they're still not doing the right thing, then vilify. But there's two it's quite often too quick and easy just to pin target somebody and kind of put all the blame onto those guys when you're not actually seeing what they're doing. At the end of the day, these guys are doing this to make a living. They're working in very hazardous environments. Sometimes there's no choice but to lose nets for the safety of the boat and the crew. And it's very rare that you meet somebody that's actually damaging a resource they need for their own good. You know, if farmers don't do it, they wouldn't fill their vans full of rubbish and not be able to harvest. And the fishing community is the same. And they do have that mentality now. We need to stop vilifying the fishing community and start seeing them as the potential custodians of the sea, because they're in the right place to do it, and give them the tools to do that.
Agreed, 100%. You know, maybe a little bit of a different conversation when we talk about petrochemical industry, in my case. But, you know, one of the things that was interesting to me was that when there are quite a few NGOs that are currently doing plastic pyrolysis and converting plastic into low sulfur fuel. The problem with that is that there's a robust amount of safety standards, health standards, ironically, even environmental standards that are put in place by a petrochemical company whenever they're doing any of those projects, even you know, employee standards. And so if an NGO is going to step into, you know, creating product out of plastic, there are industry standards that need to be met. And I believe that kind of taking the cue from industry is great, because then it holds us to a higher level of I'm using the word standard again. Yeah, but you know what I mean. You know, just so that we also self-check ourselves and ensure that whatever it is that we're ideating, it's really important for us to also make sure that we're not, like you mentioned, we're not causing another problem down the line. I mean, I can share with you, initially when we started doing plastic to fuel machines, we didn't have much money. We just fundraised among friends and family and the paddling community, the Pilates community, and you know, the initial plastic to fuel machines were actually converting ocean plastics, yes, into low sulfur fuel, but you know, the gases produced was an issue. You know, and as an NGO, we can't be solving the ocean plastic issue and, you know, causing air pollution, you know, while we're doing that. So in a similar vein, you know, maybe for both Sweets and Rob, like, would you be able to share some of the blood, sweat, and tears, you know, the rough stories of mistakes that actually then led you to kind of refine the current process that you have in place for the solutions that you are building? I love the you know, the rough Bon Jovi type sad story, like, you know, and how you kind of powered through it. It's just me.
Okay, Sweets, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. Yeah, I think I can relate a lot with what you experienced, Matilda, especially as a social enterprise that is growing in Indonesia at the time where there's none other NGOs or communities that is working on ocean pollution. We were trying to find our best actions, best services through learning by doing. And the first steps that we did to really answer the ultimate solutions that our volunteers, that our members is asking, is we diversify our actions and services, not only by doing the movements, but also by being consultants for governments, for companies, and then also making a alternative solution by ourselves, such as making a refill stores to make sure that how we can get the business models out of rural area that is accessible with the refillable solutions rather than, you know, the single-use plastic packagings, etc. And also other ways, such as we are really trying to not only mind mapping but also giving surveys having observations through manufacturers, restaurants, big industries such as retails and accommodations to really understand what are their main problems or challenges to really complete or execute our demands as the citizens that really wants them to change, right? And while we are finding out a lot of challenges that is also need complex solutions, we understand that we can also not being 100% idealistic in terms of the solutions. We did also have the pyrolysis machines together with several, it's not made by us, but our collaborators are also implementing a pyrolysis machines. So we are acting our part by making sure to sample the environmental byproducts, and then also actively searching for the standard ourselves. And we understand that the samples needs to be shared or sent to Singapore rather than being checked inside. So that's also something that we struggles, but we try to make sure our volunteers, our collaborators, and even the government that this is not the ultimate solutions. This is still the best options rather than dumping it to the oceans right now. But we are still trying to diversify our actions and giving the targets higher in terms of the waste reduction at source, and then also the recyclables rates and productions. And other than diversifying our services, we moved on to the steps where we already collaborate with a lot of companies that also produce a lot of single-use plastics, such as a mineral water plastic bottles company and etc. It's because we already know how are these challenges, and if there is not any entities that really push it inside the government by being their stakeholders, it will be longer for them to make the change, right? Therefore, every time we try to collaborate with private sectors, we do have some checklists or self-checks that you earlier mentioned as well, by making sure that can we explain to our volunteers that they do have a commitment that is not greenwashing, and then we can also understand how are their circular economy commitments or actions, and also how is our programs is incorporated into their EPR modules, such as like that. So once we can answer that questions, whether it's not a good answer yet, but we can answer it with the commitments in the future, our members and volunteers usually keen to support more rather than just blaming at us on collaborating with the bad guys. Yeah, I think that's pretty much our answers.
Thank you so much, Sweets. Rob?
Okay, I suppose just picking up on a few things that you've mentioned really. So firstly, crazy ideas are brilliant. Don't ever be scared of having crazy ideas. That's where all good ideas come from, crazy ideas. And that was something I came across when we first started out, like 2014. Marine plastic wasn't really on people's radar to that great an extent. It took a couple of years of big campaign bodies like sort of Surfers Against Sewage really pushing for it, and then it revolutionized completely once David Attenborough got up with the Blue Planet series and really sort of flagged it up. That was a big change in public perception around the issue and drove it forward. But to begin with, before that, I was repeatedly approaching different recyclers, trying to find different partners to come on board. It was all just a concept. I wanted to get something happening. 90% of the people I would have reached out to, I wouldn't have got a response out of. The majority of the rest of them, it would have been thanks, but no thanks, just being polite. And eventually you do find someone, but it does take a lot of sort of stubborn perseverance to actually try and build these things in the first place. And I think to begin with, a lot of them did think it was just a crazy notion. What's this guy on about? It's not really on people's radar anyway. They didn't appreciate the scale of the problem. They're looking at a low value waste from different waste streams coming off the beach. They didn't even know what that would look like. But it wasn't until we actually had those first trials of the recycler and we found the recycling rates were actually really high. They were much higher than what they're getting for their normal household waste recycling. So there's actually less contamination in the stuff that's coming off the beaches. Because well, in a bad way, almost, it has been scoured clean by the ocean. So it's not good in the way that whatever contaminants are in there are now in the sea. But from a recycling point of view, the actual material it's presented was clean, actually cleaner than your household waste recycling. So people aren't necessarily that vigilant when it comes to preparing their stuff to put in their household waste. So the recycling rates were the complete opposite of what anyone expected. But again, that sort of early perseverance is a challenge, and it is very easy in innovation as a whole to become demoralized by being rejected. So you have to become used to rejection to begin with quite a lot. And the other learning curve for me, I suppose, was stopping being too much of a perfectionist. I'd come from a profession where I always had to do everything exactly right, and I was really everything had to be done perfectly. And the same with the diving. With the divers, there is no margin for error. You have to make sure everything is done by the book. You can't take any chances. When it comes to innovation and creating recycling routes, you do have to take chances. And if you wait until you've got everything lined up so it works absolutely perfectly, it will never get off the ground. You've got to start with the best solution you can find. In your heart, have the ambition to try and constantly improve and continually work at it. But like you've just given the example of with the fuels, and maybe if you look at it from a different perspective, that is it still having a beneficial impact? Which is, there's new models coming along that can help with that, looking at the life cycle and assessment and that kind of thing. So is it still having a benefit, what you're doing? If it is, brilliant, then at least it's having some benefit. Yes, it's not perfect, but you're going to keep working, you're going to keep refining, you're going to keep that ambition to improve on that. And I think that's really key. And it's also a challenge, I think, with this issue and the circular economy as a whole, is there isn't a lot of other business models out there like it. So it's very difficult to pull from other people's experience, which is why I'm really keen on things like this and talking to other people, because other people might give me advice that helps, and hopefully sometimes advice could be useful for me as well. But it's another challenge, really. It's a very new field to be sort of trying to work in, and we're overcoming challenges which are quite vast, really. So it's always, that was part of the challenge, really. It was just trying to find other models we could base it on, and constantly trying to kind of innovate and think outside the box. And you end up going down lots of dead ends. You start off with one sort of idea, you adapt again, and you see things through to conclusion. But if it comes to dead end, don't get hung up on it. Just let it go, move on and focus where you need to focus on, and keep refining in that way. But very difficult thing to learn if you're a perfectionist at heart, is to let it go a little bit. And I suppose also a challenge for me has been coming to realize I can't do everything myself. Like, naturally, I love learning. I love taking on new experiences and new challenges, and I want to be good at what I do. But the reality is, when you're working in business and recycling and conservation and trying to create campaigns, you can't be good at everything. It's not possible. You have to appreciate that other people have got skill sets which are greater than yours. Really look at your own strengths and weaknesses and see where else you can get that help. And as frustrating as it can be at times, because you might be giving away something you find exciting and want to learn yourself, if somebody else is better at doing it, then they're the person to do it. And that's also part of the learning curve and one of the challenges, really. I suppose another challenge for us was we were a bit ahead of our time. So when we were talking about marine plastic and setting up recycling infrastructure for port reception facilities, etc., the government was still in a stage where they didn't even know how to engage the fishing community. They were almost scared of kind of tackling the problem of marine waste with the fishing industry. And it was almost a kind of, don't go there, we don't want to wind them up anymore. So we're already looking at marine protected areas and everything else, and we don't want another thing which we can. So in a way, it took a little bit of convincing that we're not going in with that attitude. Yes, we're conservationists, but we're going in very solutions-based, observing there's a problem, we've got a really easy solution, give us your stuff for free. It takes a little bit of convincing on that front. And through having to do it ourselves, the running costs have been kept really low because it's essential. We can't afford to have high running costs. So when I relay that to the government, when we have several different government departments that regularly ask us how we've gone about doing what we do and how do you replicate it, we're quite often saying it's relatively straightforward. There's lots of logistics involved and running costs are quite low, but this is what we need. And the answer is always, oh, there's no money for that. Because they're still in the early data gathering stages. All the money is going into consultancies and universities gathering the data to see if there's even a marine plastic problem in the first place. They're always like a few years behind. They've got to gather the data first to see how much of a challenge it is, and then that informs policy change, it informs what needs to be put in place. And things, we've been involved in discussions on the EU level with things like extended producer responsibility, but again, that's going to take legislation. Nobody really knows what that business model is going to look like. It's going to take years to evolve. And if you already have a solution that you're already doing there and then, and it's costing you money, and you need these things to kick in, you've got to find another mechanism, because you can't just hang around waiting for this stuff to happen. So in the meantime, either nothing's happening or you're losing money. So you've got to find some way of filling that stopgap until the right things are put in place to resolve this. But it's essential to do what you're doing now on the ground first, because you're proving the sort of need and demand for it, and you're getting that valuable data. You know, the data of all the material flows coming in through your channels proves there's a need for it. So yeah, that's what I've got on that one.
You know, it's really strange. Whatever you were saying, I was literally like, he's talking about me. It's like he crawled into my brain and literally went, these are all of Matilda's worries, right? Like, you know, from regulatory to budget concerns to how are we going to fund this thing? And but I got to start with the prototype. And if we don't start, then we're not going to get. And very funny that you know, as I was thinking that, I just got a message from someone else who's also watching this, who's a CEO of a seaweed startup. So, you know, he just sent me exactly the same message going like, he's talking about me. And I think, so what's really interesting that you mentioned about trying to do something different, something that's never been done before. One of the difficulties that I have as well is maybe the fact that I'm not an environmental scientist by training. I'm a TV producer by training, and I worked in social media. So it becomes very difficult when I'm trying to speak to government agencies or to, you know, the PhDs and research communities about how, you know, ocean plastics, unsorted ocean plastics, inclusive of plastics that are layered with other materials, you know, whether that's foil or paper, can be turned into low sulfur fuel or into blue hydrogen. So, you know, I'm usually laughed out of the room. And then after that, everybody's furiously Googling, right? Like, which paper is she referring to? And so it's a little bit difficult. Right now, we're actually going through exactly the same kind of trial. You know, we are embarking on a massive seaweed project where we're growing seaweed and mussels as a bioremediation to clean the waters in Pasir Ris. But together with that, we're also looking for a way to convert that seaweed as well as mussels into bioplastics. You know, again, something that everybody's kind of heard of Evo & Co, you know, the seaweed plastic stuff that's coming from Indonesia. In fact, when I worked at DBS, I was pushing them and marketing them as well. The only thing is that they've never heard about plastics from mussels. And, you know, we would be the first to do that, or at least to try. And this is kind of one of the difficulties that we ourselves also face, because there is no path in front of us to what are the properties of the polymer that needs to be akin to, you know, its plastic counterpart, you know, which property of, or which type of plastic would it emulate the most? Is it PET? Is it HDPE? Is it LDPE, PP? And, you know, this is also, you know, the aspect that I love just being able to read a whole lot of PDFs and just kind of jump into it. I have a question that's more to do with ourselves as leaders. How much of this gung-ho, let's just get into it and let's just see where this ends up. If you could kind of be that voice talking to yourself maybe 1 or 2 years ago, what are some of the things that you would advise that person or yourself from 2 years ago with regards to just like cooling your heels, or like, you know, maybe not getting too passionate to the point where you can't see the forest for the trees or the seaweed for the for the seagrasses? I don't know which analogy is better. So yeah, I'm asking for myself for and anybody that's tuned.
Yeah, I suppose learning to ask for help is a key part of it. Recognizing what your strengths are and asking for help when you need it. I was always very stubborn. I didn't like asking for help. I wanted to try and do everything myself, and it got too intense on more than one occasion. Because to begin with, I was also had a full-time job while setting up Odyssey Innovation to help finance it. I was also running the volunteer dive group, and it was too much to do by myself. I was getting lots of help with the volunteer dive group. People are willing to help with that, but actually setting up a business, it's not the kind of thing you can feel you can ask for help with, because again, it is business. It's about profit, etc. So it didn't feel right to ask for help. And I was then actually finding that I was almost cherry picking the things I wanted to do. So if I had someone message me to say there's a net washed up on the beach, I would use that as an excuse to run away from the computer and go and meet them and help bring up the net, because I enjoy that more. And I was constantly finding excuses not to knuckle down and do the admin. So if that's a problem, then you need to recognize it's a problem straight away and go, right, okay, I need to get someone in to help me on that, or I need to at least have certain times when I am unavailable and I have to knuckle down and do the other sort of sides of it too, or else you can find yourself feeling overwhelmed. So I suppose in some ways, I mean, relatively minor, that would have made a difference if I could foresee them. But in other ways, I'm glad I couldn't sort of see into the future, because I probably wouldn't have made decisions because I would have been too overwhelmed by them. When I knew the scope of what we're taking on, to begin with, very optimistic. Let's just do it, try, get started. Things like creating the kayaks, I had no idea what I was doing. I have no engineering experience whatsoever. So it was a massive, steep learning curve to learn how to sort of go about producing the material to do that, to actually creating products was a massive learning curve. But in my mind, it's really simple. You've got a big plastic object there, a kayak, and we've got all this plastic in black bags. I'll turn that into that. And obviously, it's a very, very steep learning curve after that, which we managed to get to. But if I'd known in hindsight how much work is involved, I might have just thought, Rob, you've got too much on. We'll do that some other time. I'll look into that in the future. It might never have happened. So in some ways, it's almost fortunate not to be able to look too far into the future, because you might be overwhelmed and not start in the first place.
Yeah, just adding some points that I've experienced, that understanding that we are just passing the baton is something that is really important for me to really understand more actually before we start the program, because earlier when we didn't understand the meaning of passing the baton, we think that our project must be successful to really reach the ultimate goals of the waste reductions and recycling. Maybe there's a lot of factors as well in terms of the perfectionist that Rob mentioned earlier, but again, to talk about the behavior change, to talk about the policy change, to talk about the the waste recycling change, and etc. It's really something that we do with the help from the previous collaborators, from the previous people that does that, and then also for the future generations to really make their works easier. But then again, if we're talking about the behavior change in a scale of bigger nation, bigger companies, we understand that we cannot only focusing on the field activities, but also having the parallel team to work on the advocacy levels, to really communicate with the stakeholders, especially the local government. I understand a lot about the changes, the policy or the leaders of the government that really affecting the commitments on waste issue, especially on ocean plastic. So yeah, to really understand that we are here just passing the baton is something that is make our daily field activities easier for us to really feel not overwhelmed at the end of the process.
Thank you so much, Rob, Sweets, and also Matilda. Before we, close everything, I just want to have one last question for everybody. So basically, what is your vision in the next 3 years? Like what do you hope to see within your organization itself, and how do you want to push and move that? Maybe we can start with Matilda.
Ocean Purpose Project is very young. we're extremely ambitious. So Rob, when you were talking about perfectionism, right? I think among all 3, 4 of us, maybe even the IT guys who are in this call, it really rings true. You know, as a TV producer, a lot of my life was about making sure that, you know, we come up to broadcast standards, and it's got to be perfect. And you know, one of the things that I would love for the next 5 years with what we're doing is for us to really take this back down to much smaller granular levels. You know, to kind of throw away the handbook of how perfectionism is achieved, how products and services are typically put together, you know, go-to-market strategy, and like I think all of us are starting to talk about things such as circularity, regenerative economy, you know, blue ocean strategy. One of the things that I would love is for the vision of what we're trying to do in Pasir Ris, which is a community of people that live by the beach and love the beach, to come up with creative ideas to conserve their resource, whether that's them organically doing their own beach cleanup without us having to, you know, even be there, using the resources we provide, having our own PTF unit that certifications done to convert ocean plastic into hydrogen or carbon nanotubes. Most importantly, for the seaweed project to be up and running for all the 108 seaweed farms, fish farms, to actually pivot into seaweed and mussel farming. For the waterway to be clear, I went for a swim today. It was absolutely beautiful. That's what I would love for anybody, you know, in the future, any child to be swimming in my beach town. And most importantly, for innovative products like the seaweed bioplastics to become a norm, where it's not even something cool or something sustainable, like, oh, this is a cool sustainable product. It's like, yeah, we've always had like a seaweed plastic bag, you know. That's kind of what I would love to be the norm, where you'd be insane to have a plastic, typical plastic bag. So yeah, that's the future that I am looking forward to in the next 5 years.
Thanks, Matilda. Maybe next we'll go with Sweets.
Sure. So Diverse Clean Action now, we do have from our 1,000 and up volunteers across Indonesia and Southeast Asia region, we do have 15 area that is located in the coastal area, that most of them are the diving spots area that is being adopted by youth to really make sure that they are implementing a waste collection and also to increase the recycling rate of the waste that is produced on the area. So I hope that in the 2, 3, or 5 years, again, there will be hundreds or even thousands of coastal area spots or provinces or cities that is really adopted as well, and to have a proper waste collection and recycling scheme. And also to have those spots also are having the equal access for an alternative solution, such as a refillable products, or, you know, the non-single use products that is really polluting the oceans. Yeah, I hope that, Nora.
Thank you so much, Sweets. And last but not least, Rob, how about you?
Well, on two sides of it then. So on the recycling side of it, we do get approached by a lot of different communities, beach clean groups, fishing communities that we can't yet reach. And yes, I really want to replicate what we're doing and expand out to all those so we can offer these free facilities to as many different stakeholders as we can. And we're going to find whatever mechanisms we can to make that happen over the next few years and really try and expand that. And then what I'd like to do is we've got our own innovations we're working on, obviously sort of consolidate what we're doing there, but use those as a showcase for other entrepreneurs that are also interested in working in this field, and really use that as a sort of showcase to partner and collaborate with other stakeholders to make their businesses more sustainable as well. So that's what we're sort of hoping to do, really, is to try and sort of increase the impact that we're having currently.
Thank you so much, everyone, Rob, Matilda, and also Sweets. What we can actually totally gather from this session is, of course, there's a lot of passion and love for what is it that you guys do. And I think that's very important, especially when it comes to sustainability and conservation works. And I hope that, this session could bring some kind of inspiration and also motivation for those who are listening out there to want to do something to make an impact in what is it that you do and how you can make or volunteer yourself to certain organizations that you feel that's closest to you, and you can do something for the environment and of course for the future of what's left basically. And once again, thank you so much. And before I Facebook close this session, we would like to invite everyone that's tuning in, please do join us for the month of November, where we will be looking into regions within the West Asia and also South Asia. And we'll be exploring dive education, sustainability concept, blue economy, and further with regards to what is it that we can talk about, which is important to all of us, especially as divers, because you are, after all, ocean citizens. And like what Sylvia earlier said, there's no ocean, there's no life. So before we, I'm just gonna check with my colleague Alfrance. We will not close the Zoom session. We're gonna do a little bit of a weepy, but we are good to close for Facebook. So once again, thank you everybody, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon.
Thank you.